You know, even though E3 2022 is cancelled, I still think Nintendo will do their E3 Nintendo Direct, or what used to be the E3 Nintendo Direct. I think they're gonna show off The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 as well. What do you guys think? In this video, we are going to talk about what the delay means for Breath of the Wild 2, why Nintendo could have delayed it, and what new hardware could launch alongside The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, and why I think Nintendo could use that. If you guys enjoy this video, leave a like, it helps the video out when you do, and if you want to follow me on Twitter and help me reach my goal of 900 followers, you can follow me at RoboRob93. Without further delay, let's talk about some Nintendo stuff. So Nintendo has officially delayed The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, something that I think a lot of us thought was a very good possibility. The last trailer before the delay video that Nintendo put up on their channel said that they were aiming for 2022, which was a clear sign that the devs of Breath of the Wild 2 were not entirely sure that the game was going to release in time for that 2022 release date. But I think one thing that kind of shocked me was that it was delayed until spring of 2023. I don't know about you guys, but I always thought if Breath of the Wild 2 was delayed, it would be maybe a couple months into 2023, not spring of 2023. That is a pretty huge jump, so why would Nintendo delay it to specifically spring of 2023, which E3 is right around the corner of that time? Or what was E3? I have a feeling that next year E3 is going to be cancelled as well, or it's not going to have a large presence. Well, I think Nintendo wants to line up Breath of the Wild 2's release date alongside the next Nintendo console. Now, I know people will scoff at this and say that Nintendo wouldn't release a console before the holidays, but remember, they did the same thing with the Nintendo Switch that was released in March and revealed in October. So Nintendo isn't shy about releasing things before the holiday season, or for that matter with the Switch's case after holiday season. Now the reason why I think this is recently during a hack on Nvidia, unfortunately, evidence of the next Nintendo Switch was found, or at the very least evidence that Nvidia is working on something that is DLSS powered that has to do with Nintendo. I mean, what other thing would they be working on for Nintendo that has DLSS in it? It would have to be a Switch 2 or a Switch Pro or the next Nintendo console or whatever they're going to be doing for Nintendo. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but adding DLSS to the Nintendo Switch and the Nintendo Switch Lite and the OLED isn't possible because of the hardware. I could be wrong on that, correct me in the comment section if I am, but I'm pretty sure you can. Now, for those who don't know what DLSS is, it basically makes it so that games are upscaled and running better with higher frame rates without the need of more powerful hardware. Of course, you need the right hardware to have DLSS in it, but essentially that's what it does. A very basic explanation, but it gets the job done. Now let me ask you a question. Don't you think it's kind of odd that Nvidia is working on DLSS technology for Nintendo Switch or Nintendo Switch 2 or wherever they're going to be calling it, and Breath of the Wild 2 gets delayed specifically to spring of 2023, the very same time that Breath of the Wild 1 was released? Now it could be later in spring, but I think they're going to release it around the same time as Breath of the Wild 1. I personally think it is. I could see Nintendo releasing a Switch 2 that still plays the past games, by the way. There is no way Nintendo would drop such a huge install base that is still growing, and release Breath of the Wild 2 to sell with their shiny new console that is more powerful, uses DLSS, and hopefully fixes that Joy-Con drift problem, with of course all the benefits that come with the Nintendo Switch OLED. Which, by the way, if you're worried about the OLED burn, people have been doing some extensive tests with the Nintendo Switch OLED, keeping it on for a very long time, and it seems like everything is okay. There is no significant visual side effects of keeping an OLED screen for the Nintendo Switch on. I know some people were a bit worried about that, but just know that it's all fine. Now, the question becomes, when can we see the Nintendo Switch revealed? Well, there are two ways personally that I think that Nintendo could do. The first one is unlikely, but it's possible. We could see it at E3 2023, or I guess what was E3 2023. Now it's just June. Now speaking on that a little, I've seen some people think that Nintendo isn't going to be doing their E3 Nintendo Direct like they usually do in June, or I guess it's just the June Direct now, but I think they definitely will. Nintendo has a ton of games they need to show off. Nintendo wouldn't just stop talking about these games, especially considering Bayonetta 3 doesn't even have a release date. It's supposed to be 2022 though. Also, Xenoblade still needs gameplay to show off as well, something that I think could happen at the Nintendo Treehouse. And then there's Splatoon 3 as well, another big game for Nintendo, so I think they're still going to do the E3 Nintendo Direct, but it's just going to be the June Nintendo Direct instead. Plus, Nintendo usually does their own thing, and I don't see why E3 being cancelled would affect that. Now, the second option would have to be about half a year before the launch of the console. The original Nintendo Switch was released in March, but revealed 5 months before in October. Now, if you wanted to release Breath of the Wild 2 on the same day as the first one, which was in March, the Switch reveal would be in November. But Nintendo could play around with the dates, of course, but the end result would still be the same: release the Switch alongside Breath of the Wild 2. Now, as to why Nintendo would want a Switch 2, it's pretty simple. I think for a while now, Nintendo devs have been struggling somewhat with the Nintendo Switch in developing their games. We've seen this come out from multiple games, and I think it showed up in the gameplay as well. Don't get me wrong, some Nintendo Switch games do look fantastic, but some have to sacrifice visual fidelity, sometimes they have to do lower resolutions or lower frame rates, or sometimes they have frame rate problems and resolution problems. Things that drastically impact the gameplay, so a more powerful Switch with the more smoother experience would be the best route. I mean, have you played Age of Calamity? It's pretty bad. Even on the smaller screen, it's still noticeable. Put it on a bigger screen and it is really noticeable. Making games easier for devs to make and having more power would fix this, especially for those third-party devs that Nintendo will probably want. Not to mention, as time goes on and games get more demanding. But aside from that, I think Nintendo is going to want a new, more powerful console to keep those third-party games coming in. Back on the Wii U, Nintendo didn't secure those third-party games all that well. There were a ton of other problems, of course, like marketing, of course, but games released between the big Nintendo games were really absent, which made a drought for releasing games on the Wii U. I think if you guys remember, it was called the Wii U drought. It was a pretty dark time for Nintendo fans. I also think that Breath of the Wild 2 is just a bigger and more ambitious game than the last. There are some people though saying that why is Nintendo taking so long for this game if they're just reusing assets? My thought on that is that Breath of the Wild 2 is just more ambitious. They have the sky areas as well, which I'm sure will take some time creating. They're going to be adding new character types, new mechanics, and they're going to have to create a lot of new things for the game as well. Not to mention, Breath of the Wild 2 gameplay has a lot of different things that interact with each other. That's one of the appeals of Breath of the Wild 2 is all of these mechanics affecting each other, like the physics. So making sure those things are just really solid and great and there's no bugs whatsoever, and not making a Cyberpunk 2077 situation or an Anthem situation or, God forbid, an Avengers game situation is something that I think the devs really want to do. So overall, I think the delay isn't really a big deal personally. I'm glad they're taking their time on this game because I want it to be fantastic just like the first one, or even better. Plus, Nintendo is probably okay with doing this. I mean, have you seen the insane games that Nintendo has stored over the next 1 or 2 years? There's a lot of big games, not to mention games that we don't even know about, which will probably be revealed in June. But overall, even if I'm wrong, I think our time on the Nintendo Switch is going to be filled with fun and just fantastic games like it has been in the past 5 years, including Breath of the Wild 2. And with that, I'll leave you guys with 2 questions. The first one is, why do you think Breath of the Wild 2 was delayed, and do you think the E3 Nintendo Direct or June Nintendo Direct is still going to happen? And second, what are your thoughts on the Master Sword? Why is it broken? Do you think something happened to the other half? Do you think someone has the other half? What are your thoughts on that? I want to do a video replying to your thoughts on that, so make sure you leave them in the comment section below. And if not, on your way out, make sure you subscribe for more videos and also have that notification bell on. And if you want to support the channel in any other way, there is my Patreon and Twitter account in the pinned comment if you're interested in those. Oh, and also have this donut if you're still sticking around for me rambling. Thanks for watching, guys, and remember, stay safe, stay charged, and have a good one.